So good afternoon. Welcome back to the second half of the symposium. Just to say, it's a real privilege to be here. It's really nice that we could bring Nottingham and London together to a symposium, which I used to call Tim and his friends. But of course, everybody's involved in a lot of places. It's a real pleasure to have our students here as well. That's great that we can have these discussions which are ongoing. So this afternoon, we're going to have a presentation by Tim Collett. And then I'll introduce in a bit more detail later the session about, I can't even remember, material and construction, I believe, with Rod Hayes from Caruso St. John, Anna-Lee Riches, and Julian Lewis. But I'll introduce you in a moment. First of all, it's my pleasure to introduce Tim Collett, my colleague at the University of Nottingham. And Tim had a lot of experience in practice before he joined us. For 22 years, I think he was 14 years at Caruso St. John, and 3 years as 6A architect. So a lot of the thinking around continuity and innovation he brought from practice to teaching. And I think we were very privileged that he made the jump from practice to academia. So we're delighted that he could bring his experience and knowledge and also his curiosity and innovation to it. But I'm sure Tim will introduce his own pedagogy in a moment. Okay?
Thank you. Right. Okay. Thank you, Katrina, for the introduction. Yeah, so I worked in practice for 22 years and had a great time, and then moved laterally to teaching full time. So I run the Masters of Architecture course, the Part 2 course at Nottingham, which so I've done it for 4 years, and I'm really enjoying it. So yeah, it's really good and great. So I'm going to talk about kind of an idea behind the course, an idea that we try to impart to the students, which is the idea that all buildings have value, as do all people. So yeah, I think everyone would agree that Downing College is a building that has value. I was a project lead on this project by Caruso St. John. It's a social consensus which is formalized through listing. So this building is listed grade 1. But even the lowly Deluxe Decorator Center on the periphery of Lincoln has value. The built fabric is a resource to be used with care. When you look carefully at the interior, there's a beauty in the structure, which is highly efficient. Slim steel beams, kind of extraordinarily slim, span the width of the hall. I think you could call this a hall. Combined together with natural daylight through evenly distributed roof lights, which appear a bit random and would benefit from a clean. So you can see its brilliant value, as Deluxe had pointed out. So while in practice, I almost exclusively worked on existing buildings. So I came from Canada in 1996 and started working in the UK. And I think coming from a country which really, you could say, has no historic built fabric at all, really. And what it does have, it doesn't tend to respect very well. It was really special for me to work in existing buildings. So I was the project lead on Bethnal Green Museum of Childhood, Phase 1. The building is listed grade 2 star. Downing College, grade 1. Newport Street Gallery, grade 2. And at 6A, I worked on the Milton Keynes Gallery, which is not listed. And I mean, listing is sometimes, I guess, a constraint in how you can approach working with existing buildings. But in the MK Gallery, the constraint was budget. And in a way, I mean, budget is often a constraint which actually brings out the best in projects. I mean, it forces you to distill down to the essence, to the things that are really important. And I love the way we worked on the MK Gallery. And in the first projects, the existing building was going to be demolished, but in the end it was kept. It was seen really as a building with little value. And yeah, this is the old, I think this was the art storeroom, which is now the cafe. And you have things like kind of floating doors in space and this strange kind of configuration, which is a result of what was there before. Yeah, so yeah, so the first step in kind of seeing value in all buildings comes from looking at the world around us with understanding and appreciation and feeling, looking carefully, observing, and documenting. So when I went to set up a studio, I thought about, you know, what was like, I don't know, what mattered the most to me, really. And the thing was, I actually thought, well, I really actually love working in existing buildings, and I find it much richer and much more interesting than new build. And the question I wanted to ask was, why is that? Like, why is it so interesting? So I set up the studio continuity, which I run every year when we do different projects and so on. But basically, it comes from the fact that I love working in existing buildings. And yeah, so I think, you know, a few years ago, we talked about refurbishment earlier. You know, refurbishment was seen as the poor second cousin to new build, and everybody wanted to do a new build project, but they did those refurbishment projects to come through. And I think that's switched around now. But yeah. So my studio asked the question, why is oldness so compelling? So continuity proposes a methodology, which I call looking at oldness, a methodology for working in existing buildings with understanding and appreciation in order to maximize their poetic potential. The first step is recording facts. It's about documenting without preconceived notions. Judgment is suspended. It's about observation. The second step I call seeing history. It's about understanding the cultural context that has shaped the original building and subsequent changes. Understanding, you know, what the architect or the owner, the builder, all the different contributors thought and why things happened the way that they did. The third step is conveying emotion. This is about expressing and documenting the emotional content in the existing. This is the most important of all three steps. I think when you work on an existing building, you want to work with and you want to enhance, in particular, the emotional qualities of a building. Then I call it the assessment of significance. Of course, it's not an assessment of significance like in conservation, but it's about drawing up a set of design priorities. It's about making judgments and coming to conclusions, you know, comparing, contrasting, and analyzing and synthesizing the three previous steps. Yeah. And then, so that when you move forward, you do so with a sense of, I mean, this morning people talked about how important it is to understand and appreciate what's there to shape those kinds of decisions that you need to make. So I'm going to show you some examples of some, very quickly, different student projects. So yeah, so when you see all buildings as having value, and you see buildings as a resource, then the first step is to keep everything unless there is a good reason not to. A kind of a near zero demolition approach. So Stephen was talking about that in the discussion this morning. Yeah. So what do we got here? So this is a study. We did a study of Kazu Shinohara during lockdown. So we went to Japan virtually. That was really fun. We did a friend of mine there. He took us on a tour of one of the Shinohara houses. You know, like on his phone. It was almost as good as being there. But it was a good thing to do during lockdown. And it meant I could take my studio globally. Because obviously if your studio is really about visiting buildings, you're kind of limited how far you can sort of take people. So this is a plaster model of the Shinohara fissure space as a solid, and then as a void. Then they translated the ideas from Japan to a UK context. So this is the Eagle Building in Nottingham, which is now demolished. And they applied the concept of fissure to the Eagle Building. That's the proposed plan and the existing plan. Add, don't subtract. Another approach, very similar. This is Burroughs Court in Snayton in Nottingham. It's not the most beautiful building, though it has now been refurbished. Still not that beautiful. And yeah, it wasn't in the best of condition. So Ryder was influenced by Peter Markley's Apartments and Sagans, taking kind of some of the ideas that Stephen was talking about. He was sort of engaging with those ideas of no corridors, of making large, generous rooms and making a family of rooms. So that's the existing plan, and that's Ryder's proposal. In order to do what he wanted to do, columns ended up in the middle of rooms. We thought this was something special, that actually a column in a room always makes different spaces within a space. And so we thought that was quite a nice thing. Yeah. So, and then he wrapped the building in a new facade, which pulled from the classical tradition to bring a kind of a new language to the building and kind of unify it. So the next idea is sort of like part 2 of the talk. All people have value. So at this point, you might expect me to speak about social justice, inclusivity, these kinds of things. But I'm not going to. I'm going to talk about the people that are connected to a building, the kind of the clients, the users, and the project team. And in that list, I'd say the users are most important, but I'm going to probably talk more about the project team. So under the idea of the continuing life of a building, so, you know, buildings, if you're kind of having an approach that buildings have value, then they slowly change and transform through time. So Downing College, designed and built by William Wilkins in 1821, remodeled by Barry in 1873, transformed by Howell, Killick, Partridge, and Amos in 1967, and again transformed by Caruso St. John in 2009. By the way, I see this. I've always saw this project as a piece of theater. It's always how I've felt about it, which I guess you would classify as restoration under like the kind of Ruskin thing. Yeah, so there are many players in the life of a building. When a building has a continuing life. So architecture is not about architecture with a capital A. It's not about a single author. It's about a multiplicity of authors and participants, all who add value to the continuing life and the evolving life of a building. It's a collaborative process. And even just in one small project, there are a multitude of contributors. I don't think that's the whole list. So that's you know, the list of clients, architect, all the consultants, contractors, subcontractors, etc. So then taking that and translating it to a teaching framework, this idea of collaboration. We work with practice, all schools, I think, do. So working with practice, guest lecturers, guest tutors, critics, and researchers, honorary professors. Julian Lewis and Stephen Taylor are both honorary professors. Really happy to have them here today. Working with live clients, such as Nottingham Co-Housing. We've been working with the estates team the last couple of years, which has been really good. They used to be quite difficult, and now they're really open. Yeah. But the more interesting thing we've been doing is collaborating with the MEng Architectural Environmental Engineering students. So we've been doing that for a couple of years now. So at Nottingham, we're in the Faculty of Engineering, and the Department of Architecture is Architecture and Built Environment, and half of it's environmental engineers, half architects. And yeah, so I'll present a couple of examples. So the first one is the Castle Meadow campus, which was formerly the Inland Revenue Center by Hopkins Architects. So the university has bought that and is changing it to a city campus. So the architects and engineers worked in a collaborative relationship, an exchange of ideas and work. The way we've structured it kind of like a design team. So the architecture and engineering students work together on a single project, but the engineers make a separate submission, and the architects make another separate submission. So they're working separately, but they meet regularly to share progress and ideas. And the work of the architecture students informs the engineers, and the work of the engineering students informs the architecture students. So, yeah. What have we got? So, Sim and Ava produced this site record drawing, which is loosely based on Julian's hairy drawings. And then the engineers take it and use it in their report to set the context for their project. The engineering students produce a wind simulation. The architects take the wind simulation, adopt it, and adapt it for their portfolio. I really like this sheet. I think they're almost like these kind of beautiful paintings. Yeah. The architects produce an energy-scape drawing. So we were looking at the work of Hiroshi Sambuchi, Japanese architect, who has these ideas around energy-scapes. The engineers produce their version of an energy-scape drawing. Yeah, so it's reinterpreted by them. All of this comes together and informs the architecture students' design proposition. Second example is People's College in Nottingham. So it's an abandoned technical college from the 1960s. It's currently partially occupied by sixth form and partially occupied by asbestos. And it's probably going to get demolished, which is a real shame because it's quite a fine building. So Nick's proposal for a near zero demolition transformation to an urban agricultural co-housing community. So Nick and Jocelyn were working together and sharing information, sharing drawings, calculating rainwater quantities, and being respectful of each other's disciplines. So to quote from Jocelyn's exchange here, so they submit a collaboration document, and this was just one of the sheets from the collaboration document. We just asked them to document a bit of how they're working together. But I just think this is really beautiful. Jocelyn says, I have no architectural standards, but those images, in my humble opinion, are literally incredible and so clear, and are going to be so useful for the explanations within my report. So truly thank you for the time put into them. So I think, it's about respect, isn't it? Right. So, part 3, seeing value where there is none on the periphery of Lincoln. So this is a kind of a quick snapshot through our autumn project, thinking particularly about value. The project was actually framed more about post-carbon futures, and peripheries. So this is a view over the Great Northern Terrace Industrial Park in Lincoln, where our study area is located. So when we started the project, wanted to do something on a periphery, but we wanted to sort of take on an area which doesn't really have much perceived architectural value and see what we could do with it. And back to the lowly deluxe decorator center on the periphery of Lincoln. So the students worked in groups. I'll present a few examples, and the engineers and architects were working together again. So recording facts. on the Deluxe Center. So this is a proposal for a new transport hub, a new timber structure inserted into the Deluxe Decorative Center and connected to the city. A new factory for straw construction products assessed by the engineering students. So that's the Deluxe Center there. I'm sorry. Assessed by the engineering students. And it's sort of asking, they started to ask questions which makes them sort of starting to think really kind of big scale. And then they looked at land, so the engineering students looked at land use. And in turn, the architects thought at a wider scale and made a proposition for a post-carbon material belt which would wrap around Lincoln, addressing the periphery condition around the city. This project was an investigation into the potential that future flooding holds. So the river valley in Lincoln is projected to flood by 2060 from rising sea levels. And students were thinking about how this could actually be something to engage with. Right, where am I? So yeah, so it'd be intermittent flooding. They proposed an agricultural and kind of growing community. There's the Deluxe Center. So they start to inhabit the roofs. Yeah. In this project, the Deluxe Decorative Center becomes Renewal Junction, bringing together reuse, recycling, and education, markets, workshops, and agricultural in a kind of fun project, obviously inspired by Archigram. A proposition, again, for the future. So in conclusion, all buildings have value, as all people have value. Buildings are a resource to be used wisely and with care, with appreciation, understanding, and feeling. In this image, Alice creates a phenomenological garden for a dementia respite centre in the abandoned Great Northern Railway warehouse in Nottingham, bringing together respect and poetry for the existing building and the people that inhabit it. Thank you.